Dad banned me from Thanksgiving to keep my sister comfortable. He forgot I paid $8,000 to heat their house for 2 years. So I canceled their service right before winter. Now they're freezing and I'm finally warm in my own peace. I'm sitting back against the chair, one hand holding a warm cup of tea, the other flipping through an old magazine I bought from the thrift shop on the corner. The early November air seeps through every crack of my tiny apartment on the outskirts of Minneapolis. Outside the window, the leaden gray sky looks like it's trying to press snow onto the ground, but is strangely silent. The phone rings suddenly, breaking the delicate quiet. I glance at the screen. Dad, my breath catches for a second. I hit the speaker button, not allowing myself to hope for anything good. Emily, you don't need to come home for Thanksgiving this year, his voice says, light as if he were talking about picking up more toilet paper. For a second, I think I misheard. I'm sorry, why? We just think it's better if. You stayed put, he continues without pause, like he had rehearsed it in his head. To keep things peaceful. Mandy's been a bit on edge lately, you know. I set the teacup down on the table. The sound of ceramic hitting wood is sharp and dry. Mandy. Again. Mandy. My sister. The princess who never had to be responsible for anything. Anytime there's a problem, the whole family holds their breath, just so she can feel comfortable. So, what you're saying is I'm not invited just because Mandy gets I enunciate each word, trying to stay calm, though my throat feels tight. My dad sighs. That signature sigh of his that means don't make this a big deal. It's just one day, Emily. You'll be fine. I shoot up from the chair, the wood creaking underneath in protest. Just one day. I repeat, my voice now as cold as the frost on the porch. You say that after I've sent over $4,800 to the house since January, just to keep the furnace running through winter? Silence on the other end. Just the faint hum of the phone line, stretching out the distance between me and him. Don't bring money into this, he finally says, a little flustered. You offered to help. I let out a dry, hollow laugh that echoes in the empty room. Offered? In January, when the heating bill spiked and you called at midnight saying the house was freezing, who paid it immediately? Me. In March, when Mom cried because the furnace was clanking, who called the repairman? Me again. And in September, when Mandy blew through most of her savings on her podcast plan, who paid for the fall heating oil? Still me. He doesn't argue. Just goes back to the same tired line. Family is family, Emily. But this time, Mandy really needs calm. She's been through a lot. I stare out through the fogged-up window. Snow is beginning to fall. Small flakes quietly covering the walkway. I've been through a lot too, but I was never given that kind of priority. He tries to keep his voice even, but I can hear the impatience creeping in. Don't make this awkward. It's not personal. I take a deep breath, fingers gripping the edge of the table. Then don't expect another dime from me this winter. If I'm not considered part of the family, don't treat me like an ATM. I hang up before he can respond, the screen going black like my eyes right now. Outside, the snow keeps falling. Silent. Freezing. But not quieter than the room I'm standing in. I sink onto the edge of the bed, hands clasped together. My thoughts tangled like the old chords in the kitchen roar. That short phone call replays in my mind like a broken tape. They really did it. Excluded me from Thanksgiving. As casually as canceling a dentist appointment. I look up at the small photo on the shelf. Me and my parents at Thanksgiving in 2019. I had just started my first job at the shipping company. Low pay, long shifts. But I still caught a bus home just to sit at the table, eat Mom's roast chicken and listen to Dad rant about his team losing. That warm smell feels like an old, dusty memory. I get up, walk to the desk and open my laptop. Wind howls outside, slipping through the old window frame, sharp and bitter. I open the utility payment account, the one I set up for them last winter after Mom sobbed on the phone, saying it was too cold and they couldn't afford heating oil. I was the one who called the oil company every month. I was the one who paid every bill, every dollar. Over $2,400 last year and $4,800 this year. Just for heating. I did it not because anyone asked, but because I thought it was the right thing to do. I used to believe helping family through hard times came without conditions, until I became the extra piece. I pull up the Excel file where I quietly logged every transfer. The last entry reads 10 months ago, $400 TH sent ahead of the cold, so they wouldn't worry. I wonder, do they even remember? I watched Mandy, my sister, burn through nearly $16,000 of my parents' savings in 4 months. Her artisanal candle business sounded artsy, until she ordered over 1,000 candles from a mass production plant in Texas, slapped on a handmade label, and thought she could sell them at triple the price. No one bought them, the inventory piled up in the garage, and my parents, instead of scolding or holding her accountable, just shook their heads and said, "She's young, everyone makes mistakes." I didn't say a word, just quietly sent more money to help them through winter. Meanwhile, Mandy kept posting pictures on Instagram. $7 lats at vintage cafes, brunches with friends in the latest Cerakote. Every time I scrolled past one, my hand would drift to my back, still sore from a 10-minute loading shift. I almost texted to ask why, but then I thought, maybe it's something I'll never truly understand or accept. I returned to the screen, the cursor blinking over the cancel service button. Just one click in the system will stop automatic payments starting next month. I sit quietly for a long while, not because I'm unsure, but because I'm letting myself remember what it felt like to matter to them. And then I click. A notification pops up. Service will end on November 2nd, 4 weeks before Thanksgiving. I close the laptop and walk to the window. Snow is falling now, each flake as weightless as my father's words on the phone. Except snow, when it falls long enough, can freeze a whole house. They'll notice, but not right away. Mandy will keep believing the world revolves around her. Mom will try to ignore it until her fingers go numb while making dinner. And Dad, he'll get angry, like always. But he won't be able to deny that he's the one who told me to stay put. Part of me feels hollow, like I just let go of something important. But another part, the one that woke up the third time I had to choose between buying a new coat or sending money home, feels lighter. For the first time in a long time, I'm standing up for myself. And I know this winter will be long, but at least I'm no longer the one shivering because of someone else's decision. I started waking up earlier, not because my job changed, but because sleep hasn't felt peaceful since that call. In the days after canceling my parents' heating service, I carried a constant tension, like walking a tightrope. Part relief, part doubt. But every morning, when I get out of bed and my feet touch the cold floor of this small but peaceful apartment, I remember why I did it. On November 2, the system officially sent confirmation the heating oil service for the house at 422 Elm Street had been canceled. I read that message while sipping coffee in the kitchen, the little space heater humming steadily by my feet. A quiet kind of comfort I bought for myself, piece by piece through every extra shift. That day, the snow fell unusually thick. Minneapolis was already cold, but this year winter seemed to arrive a few weeks early. I thought about my parents' two-story house I grew up in, with its old shingles and thin glass windows, where the cold could creep in after just one night without heat. I didn't feel happy picturing them bundled up in winter coats, but I didn't feel guilty either. It was time I understood that kindness isn't an obligation, especially when it's treated like a given. For days later, the first message came from Mom Emily. "The heating system seems to be acting up. Can you check it for me?" I stared at the message, then set my phone down. I didn't reply. That evening, I got a text from Mandy, just one line, so childish. No greeting, no question, just judgment as always. She probably thought I'd react, scramble to explain, or maybe even apologize, but I simply switched my phone to silent. On the 7th day, Dad called. I let it ring until it stopped on its own. 3 minutes later, a voicemail popped up. "Emily, I don't know what's going on. The house is down to 58 degrees. If you know anything, call me." His voice was hoarse and sharp, a mix of anger and concern. I didn't listen to the voicemail. Instead, I went to the bookstore on Lake Street, bought a new novel and sat 4 hours at the cafe next door, where the heater roared and the smell of warm cinnamon waffles filled the air. I let myself enjoy something I had always postponed. Time for myself. On the 10th day, I got a call from an unknown number. It was the heating oil provider. "Hi, is this Miss Emily? Are you planning to renew service for the house at 422 Elm Street? We haven't heard back from the homeowners and the previous contract was under your name." I answered clearly no, the contract was canceled and will not be renewed. "I'm no longer responsible for that house." "I see," the rep said, hesitating slightly. "So, just to confirm, you're not intending to continue payments?" I looked out the window where slow snowflakes blanketed the street. "That's correct." On November 14th, the messages started coming in rapid succession. "Mom Emily, it's only 50 degrees in the house. Your dad refuses to wear a heavy coat and Mandy's been coughing all day. Can you please call me? Dad, this isn't about money anymore. This is family. Mandy, this time more bitter fine. Just pretend you weren't ever part of this family." I read each message. Didn't delete them. Didn't reply. I just saved them as a record for myself of where I once poured out everything and what I got in return. On the 16th day, Minneapolis was hit by the first snowstorm of the season. News alerts advised everyone to stay indoors. Some areas temporarily lost power. I sat by the window wrapped in a thick blanket, hands curled around a mug of hot cocoa, the heater humming steadily beside me. Outside, the wind howled through every corner of the city. Part of me wondered, were they huddled together in the living room wrapped in every blanket they owned? Were they thinking of me? Not as a money transfer, but as a person? The one who had quietly kept that house warm for the past 2 winters? Maybe not. But I wasn't waiting for that anymore. I set my phone aside, pulled the armchair closer to the heater, and opened the first page of my new novel. My eyes paused at the opening line, "You can't warm a place where they always saw you as the cold wind." And I smiled. Since the heating was cut, the messages from my family increased with each drop on the thermometer. I didn't need to check my phone to guess their contents. They all carried the same tone. Urgency, blame, sometimes desperation. On November 17th, the first text came from Mom Emily. "It's 54 degrees Fahrenheit in the house. Your dad keeps coughing and refuses to take medicine. Can you help call someone?" I read the message, then place the phone face down on the kitchen counter. On the stove, a pot of potato and celery soup bubbled, its rich aroma filling the small kitchen. I stirred steadily, the heat fogging up the window panes. That afternoon, the outside temperature dropped to 25 degrees Fahrenheit. The snowstorm arrived earlier than expected, wind gusting against the rooftops. But inside my little apartment, everything was warm and quiet. I wrapped myself in my favorite sweater, turned on the oven for extra warmth, and poured a cup of cinnamon tea. Somewhere else, I knew they were pulling out every thin blanket in the house, layering clothes and turning up a thermostat no longer connected to anything. On November 19th, Dad called 12 times. I didn't pick up a single one. A message followed, short and commanding, "Call me back." This isn't a joke. I gave a dry laugh. To them, I was still the obedient daughter, the one behind the scenes, the one who handled things. They forgot that even kindness has its limits. That same day, Mandy posted a story on social media. A picture of her feet in 6 socks with the caption, "Cold enough to feel like we live in a freezer." I just scrolled past. I didn't feel pity. I didn't find it funny. I just thought it was accurate. They were living in a freezer. They had shut themselves into the moment. They called and told me to stay back for Mandy's peace. On November 21st, Mom called again, voice choked. "Emily, it's down to 40 degrees Fahrenheit in the house. Your dad's sleeping in a winter coat. My hands are so numb, I can't even do the dishes. Can you do something?" I was prepping grilled cheese for dinner. The oven glowed orange and the scent of golden sizzling butter filled the room. I didn't answer. That evening I ate in silence, the occasional buzz of messages breaking through the crunch of each bite. Each time my phone vibrated, I glanced briefly, a habit I'd formed over the past week, then went back to enjoying my meal. I wasn't glad they were suffering, but I wasn't sad either. I was simply living within the boundaries I had drawn after years of being seen as the financial backup with no need for consent. On November 23rd, 2 days before Thanksgiving, a message from Dad made me pause mid. Mine a slice while chopping onions. "Emily, if you still consider yourself part of this family, now's the time to prove it." I set the knife down and looked out the window. Outside, snow blanketed the porch and the neighbors' cars. I closed my eyes, picturing the old house where I learned to ride a bike, where I wrapped my first Christmas gift, now sitting cold and silent. But in that vision, I no longer saw myself in the frame. I poured more hot water into the teapot. As the steam rose, I thought about Mandy, who once told me I was useless for refusing to fund her local fashion magazine idea last year. About Dad, who said I needed to stop being so sensitive when I brought up always being excluded from family meetings. About Mom, who stayed silent every time I was dismissed, just to keep the peace. I had been silent long enough. That night I curled up on the sofa, a book in hand, covered with the light fleece blanket I bought last year. The room was dimly lit by a single lamp, but it was enough. Warm and peaceful. My phone kept ringing. I still didn't answer. Because sometimes the only way for others to recognize your worth is to disappear from the place they always assumed you'd be. On Thanksgiving morning, I woke before sunrise, the pale light slipping through thin white curtains. Outside, snow had blanketed the steps and the city was eerily quiet. No cars, no voices, just the wind whispering over rooftops. A gentle reminder that winter had claimed every corner. I turned on the coffee maker and made myself a simple breakfast. Crispy toast, peanut butter, and a juicy orange. I didn't prepare turkey. I didn't make the mashed potatoes Mom used to cook. I didn't want anything that reminded me of the old kitchen where the three of us used to squeeze in on holidays. This year, I chose simplicity. Not from lack, but because I no longer needed to pretend things were the same. At 10 a.m., I was on the sofa, blanket draped over me, holding a hot cup of coffee, feet stretched to the edge of the table. A documentary I loved was playing on the TV. Everything felt so peaceful, I almost forgot the emotional storm of the past few weeks. Then the doorbell rang. Sharp. Insistent. I knew who it was before I even stepped into the hallway. I peeked through the peephole and wasn't surprised to see the familiar figure. A thick gray coat, cheeks flushed from cold and frustration. I still holding that look I'd known since childhood. Not apology, but expectation. I cracked the door slightly, warm air spilling out, hitting my father's gaunt face. "Emily," he said, his breath forming pale clouds. "We need to talk." I leaned against the door frame, hands still on the knob. "I don't think a day is the right day to." "You cut the heat," he said flatly. "The house is freezing. Your mom's sick, Mandy's. She's locked herself upstairs. It's 38 degrees in there." I kept my gaze steady on his. "I didn't cut anything. I just stopped paying. Those are two different things." He frowned. "You know we're not good with tech. The contract was under your name. When you canceled, the company didn't notify us. Because it was never in your name to begin with," I said. "I handled everything. For 2 years, over $8,000, and then, with one call, I was cut out of dinner to avoid upsetting Mandy. So now maybe you should handle the rest." He flinched like he hadn't expected me to remember every number. But I remembered every bill, every skipped meal, so I could send money. Every morning I waited at the bus stop in the snow just to make my shift on time. "Emily, don't make this more complicated than it is," he said, trying to keep his voice calm. "This is all just a misunderstanding. It's just been a tough year. Mandy's been through a lot." I sighed. "Dad, Mandy's been through a lot because she puts herself there. I'm the one who gets pushed out. I stayed quiet when she blew all her savings on a creative academy she dropped after 2 months. I stayed quiet when she borrowed money and disappeared. But when I got excluded from a family meal because of her fragility, that was it. No more." He stood there in silence for a few seconds, then he shook his head slightly, voice lower now. "We have no money, Emily. We've sold nearly everything valuable. I called the heating company, but we can't afford the upfront cost. Your mom has a fever. We can't take it much longer." I could feel the cold seeping through the cracked door, but I didn't move. "You told me I should stay back to keep the peace for Mandy. I did exactly that. I stayed back. As for peace, I don't know about you, but I found mine." He gripped the edge of his hood, eyes narrowing. "You're punishing the whole family over one sentence," said in frustration. I opened the door a little wider, letting him see the warm apartment behind me. The kitchen glowing, the neatly set table, the quiet hum of the heater in the corner. "It's not punishment," I said softly. "It's just letting you feel the cost of pushing someone aside when you no longer need them." He stared at me for a moment, then turned and walked away, his footsteps crunching through the snow. I closed the door, the sound of the lock clicking into place, clean and firm. Outside, the snow kept falling. Inside, I poured myself another cup of coffee. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was trembling anymore. The week after Thanksgiving, I got a call from Haley, my cousin who lives in southern Minnesota. One of the few relatives who still kept in touch with me despite not being close to Mandy. Her voice came through the speaker loud and clear, mixed with the sound of wind howling against her window. "I just talked to Aunt Claire," Haley began, straight to the point. "Things at your house are worse than I thought." I sat down at the dining table, holding a steaming cup of ginger tea, my eyes following the fog rising on the window pane. "Mandy's moved out," Haley continued. "Her new boyfriend just broke up with her. She crashed at her best friend's place, but they only let her stay for a few days. Now she's sleeping on someone's couch in Eden Prairie." I wasn't surprised. Mandy always had a way of making everything orbit around her until no one was left to spin. The affection she'd relied on all her life had finally scattered with the cold wind. "What about my parents?" I asked, my voice calm. "Aunt's staying in a roadside motel near Highway 52nd, real cheap. The kind people rent by the week with walls thin as paper. I heard she's got a mild case of pneumonia." "And your dad?" Haley hesitated, then sighed. "He sold Grandpa's old watch collection to pay for some temporary heating oil. But it'll only last a few days." I gently tightened my grip around the teacup. That watch collection was the only thing my grandfather had left behind, once displayed like a treasure in the glass cabinet in the living room. Now it was being listed online, like items no one even cared to bargain for. "You okay, Emily?" Haley asked softly, sensing my long silence. "I'm okay," I replied. "Just a little sad about how it all ended." "And not," Haley said, her voice firmer. "I think you did the right thing. If people only come to you when they need something, that's not family. That's using you." We chatted a little more before hanging up. I looked at the phone in my hand, the screen now dark, reflecting my face in the kitchen light. Not happy, not angry. Just the cold clarity of someone who had finally stopped. Not because they were tired, but because they had gone far enough to realize they owed no one anything anymore. In the days that followed, I slipped back into my regular rhythm. Early mornings with coffee, work shifts at the distribution center from 7 to 3, afternoon stops at the local market for fresh produce and new pastries. Evenings spent reading, listening to old jazz records, and occasionally calling Haley to hear stories from outside the family circle. Other than that, I heard nothing from Mandy, Dad, or Mom. The messages had stopped after Dad came to my door. The old house on Ashwood Street was now listed for sale on a local real estate site. Haley said they couldn't afford to keep it, not even with winter just beginning. Sometimes I dreamed of walking back into that old kitchen, the one Mom used to bake pumpkin pies, where I did my homework in high school, where Dad laid out the morning paper on the table every day. But in the dream, the kitchen was cold, dim, and no one was there. I just stood quietly, looked around, and gently closed the door behind me. I wasn't angry with them. Truly, I wasn't. But I didn't feel sorry anymore either. Maybe because in the end, I had been cold and alone too. Except I had learned to stand up and build a fire for myself. One night in early December, Haley called again. Her voice rang out between laughter and exasperation. "Emily, you won't believe this. Mandy's on the internet telling some sob story about being abandoned by family like you're the cruelest person alive." I raised an eyebrow. "She did what?" "Posted a video, crying, saying you left your family during a crisis, but not a single word about all the money you paid or how they cut you out of Thanksgiving." I chuckled, a small smile without bitterness. Let her talk. People will believe what they want. I don't have to prove anything anymore. Haley laughed loudly. "I love this version of you. Solid, unshakable. You're honestly inspiring." After the call, I made myself a cup of hot cocoa, sat by the window, and watched the snow fall slowly under the warm glow of the street lamp. The world outside was still cold, still harsh. But I had learned how to keep myself warm. From simple things, from clear boundaries, and from knowing that sometimes to live in peace, you have to walk away and never look back. That afternoon, the snow was thick and fluffy, covering the small balcony where I kept a dried lavender pot. The city was silent in the -4-degree cold. No one went outside unless absolutely necessary. I was folding a freshly washed wool scarf when the doorbell rang. At first, I thought it was a delivery, but then came a knock. Steady. Hesitant. That made me pause. I walked to the door and looked through the peephole. Mom, she stood there, bundled in a puffy coat that nearly swallowed her face. A wool scarf wrapped tightly around her neck. Snow piled on her shoulders and hat. She clutched an old handbag. Her shoes buried deep in the snow, looking both weathered and unfamiliar. I hesitated for a few seconds before cracking the door open, leaving a narrow gap between us. "Emily," my mother said softly, her voice trembling, whether from the cold or something else I couldn't tell. "I'm sorry for coming unannounced, but I didn't know how much longer I could wait." I leaned against the door frame, keeping my distance. "Why are you here in this weather?" "I took the bus," she said, inhaling before coughing lightly, then walked the rest of the way. "Took nearly an hour, but I thought maybe you'd hear me out this time." I didn't say anything, just waited in silence. "I've been thinking a lot. About Thanksgiving. About all the winters before." She tightened her grip on the bag, her eyes on the tiled doorstep where the snow had started to melt into water. And I realized I was wrong. Not just for what I said that day, but for all the years I let you carry everything and treated it like it was expected. I tilted my head slightly. For the first time in years, I saw my mother without the mask of strength. No justifications, no polished reasoning. Just a woman trying to find her way back from the path she'd chosen. "Mandy regrets it too," she went on. "She says things never should have gotten this far. She says you don't owe anyone anything." I let out a dry laugh. "Too late, Mom. Everyone says I don't owe anyone. Only after I stopped paying. Only after everything fell apart. Do I suddenly become someone worth appreciating? That's not it. She shook her head, her voice catching. I just want you to know. I understand now. And I'm sorry. I'm sorry I didn't stand by you sooner. I looked at her for a long moment. Those apologies, had they come years ago, might have softened me. But now, the wounds no longer bled. They had become scars. And scars don't feel. You chose Mandy, I said slowly, every word as sharp and cold as the wind. When I needed a seat at the table, you told me to stay back because Mandy was stressed. When the house was in trouble, I paid the bills, but Mandy was the one being comforted. When I started living for myself, you called it punishment. So what now? You're here to ask me to carry it all again? She looked up, eyes full of tears. No, I'm not asking you to come back for anything. I just want you to know. You matter. And even if you never forgive me, I accept that. I didn't respond right away. I opened the door a little wider, not to invite her in, but to let her feel the warmth behind me. From the apartment I kept lit, heated and peaceful on my own. A stark contrast to where she had come from. I'm not angry anymore, I said honestly. But I'm not the same person either. I'm not the last bolt holding the family together. I've stopped doing that and I'm not going back. She tightened her grip on her bag, then nodded. I understand. I didn't close the door right away. We stood there a few seconds more, saying nothing, letting the wind blow between the silence. Then she stepped back and turned away. I watched her walk off, her figure shrinking in the snow. When I closed the door, I didn't feel the lightness I thought I would. But there was no regret either. Just a warm certainty, like the glow of the lamp in my apartment, that I had made the right choice. I returned to the sofa, pulled the blanket over myself, and resumed the old jazz track I'd paused. And as the saxophone played, I knew, for the first time in years, I no longer needed permission to live my own life. January passed in a soft, white hush of snowfall. The city lay frozen and bitter cold, and I continued living at the quiet pace I'd chosen. My apartment stayed warm, thanks to the small heater by the window in the moments I spent reheating soup, toasting bread, or knitting scarves on lazy weekends. There were no more messages from Mom. The last time she came was right after Thanksgiving, and since then I hadn't heard a word. No blame, no begging, not even the usual New Year greetings she used to send, those generic ones with a picture. I didn't feel sad about it. In fact, I felt relieved. That silence wasn't scary. It was like fresh air after a storm that had lasted for years. Haley still gave me updates each week, as if she were the only remaining bridge between me and the rest of the family. I saw Mandy post asking for help on a community forum. Haley said during our most recent call, she said she lost her job, looking for temporary housing, included something about cracks in family relationships. Same old deflecting. I didn't say anything. I just switched my phone to speaker and kept chopping onions in the kitchen. The aroma of sautéed onions filled the room, overpowering the story being told. Uncle Mark is trying to sell his car, Haley added. That old SUV is still running fine. I heard he wants the money to pay off some overdue bills. Aunt Claire moved in with a relative in Des Moines. She said she needs time to rethink how she raised her kids. Haley chuckled bitterly on the other end. A little late, isn't it? Yeah, I replied calmly, but maybe better than never realizing it all. As time passed, things I once struggled to see became clearer. Not everyone changes, and not everyone is worth hoping they will. Some things, once broken, are better left where they fell. Like cracks on winter ice, best not stepped on, not patched. I no longer thought about Mandy every night, no longer checked social media to see who was saying what. And I certainly no longer felt the need to explain to the world what I did, right or wrong. I just lived. Truly. Every morning I woke up in this cozy apartment, reminded me that I was standing on ground I chose for myself, not on a shaky foundation built from someone else's expectations. At the end of January, I stopped by the used bookstore down the block. The shop owner recognized me instantly. Haven't seen you in a while, he said cheerfully. Braving the cold, huh? I smiled and picked out a novel about women who left their families to start over. When I got home, I placed the book on the table, boiled water for tea, and sat by the fireplace. The fire glowed bright, orange light flickering against the exposed brick wall. I pulled the wool blanket higher and stared into the flames. Steady. Quiet. Persistent. Just like me. Somewhere out there the old house was probably still cold. Maybe they were borrowing space heaters from neighbors. Maybe Mandy was filling out 8 applications. Maybe my mother still curled up every night in 3 blankets, thinking about those dinners when we were all together, and the people who no longer wanted to sit at table. As for me, I no longer belonged to that back then. The fire crackled in agreement. I reached for my tea, steam blurring my vision, though my heart had never been clearer. Winter would last. Snow would fall. But this time, I wouldn't be the one shivering. I had chosen peace. And I didn't regret it. From my story, I've learned that not all blood ties are worth preserving at all costs. Some boundaries, once crossed too many times, must be redrawn with finality. I once believed sacrifice meant love. But in truth, unconditional sacrifice only teaches others to devalue your worth. Now I no longer seek validation from my family. I live for myself. And that is the freest thing I've ever done.